Yo, what's up? This is Intangible. It's been probably over a month. It has been over a month, almost 2 months actually, since my last video. It's been a hell of a last month and a half for me, in more ways than one. Extremely busy, been through a lot. Haven't really had any time to talk boxing at any significant level on YouTube as a result of things transpiring the way they've transpired, but I've been trying anyways to keep up with the sport to the best of my ability. Obviously, over the last probably month and a half, we've seen a bit of a slowdown in the schedule. We've seen, of course, Jesse Rodriguez make his return against Rungvisai and put up a tremendous performance. We've seen Akhmadaliev against Rios. Of course, we also had Chisora versus Pulev and Magsayo Vargas. Ryan Garcia put up a good performance. We had Oscar Collazo make a very good appearance at world level against Vic Salyadar. And then moving forward, we've had Manyoth and Neom Trong and certain other very interesting fights, but overall, relative to what we had been able to get in the first probably 5 months of the year, it was rather disappointing. But the schedule is starting to pick up a little bit incrementally now. With next weekend, we have the return of Teofimo Lopez against Pedro Campa, and the subsequent weekend in the fight, the rematch I want to talk about in this video is Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua. Now, I was very excited for the first fight and felt Joshua would win. I was a little bit unconvinced of Usyk at heavyweight, not necessarily because I doubted his ability to hang with them, but skill-wise, but because I had felt that due to inactivity, injuries, and what I had sensed in the Chisora fight, I had felt that that physically he had kind of declined a bit, and I do feel as if he is past his prime physically. I feel like at cruiserweight he had a little bit more extra speed, I guess due to the decrease in weight, but I also felt his stamina was a little bit stronger. The same sort of physical bull, the cardiovascular behemoth that you saw in the fight against Myris Briedis wasn't quite the same in really either the Joshua or Chisora fights, as he was definitely a bit more wary of conserving his energy and taking certain rounds off. But obviously we saw what happened in the first fight against Joshua. It was competitive. He got off to a very fast start. Joshua made it close in the mid-rounds, and then Usyk eventually pulled away late, as he had adjusted to what Joshua was trying to bring to the table. He had lured him into fighting his fight, and the pace he had set with his feints, with his footwork, and with his lead hand control was simply too frenetic for Joshua to keep up with. He could not lure him into a fight that he was able to fight. A lot of the narrative that was going on heading into that fight was that Joshua had went into the fight with a preconceived game plan to look to box him and look to pot shot Usyk from the outside, but I highly, highly doubt it. He immediately began the fight attempting to control the center of the ring, but got popped with a straight left hand. And as we saw in that fight, and that we had seen in previous fights, the Klitschko fight, the Parker fight to some extent, and also the Kubrat Pulev fight specifically, he is very, very reactive to feints. And the type of pace that Usyk was setting, the in and out movement, had lured him into a fight that he was uncomfortable with. He could not establish or set his feet at mid-range to be able to get his punches off. And when he was able to get his punches off at mid-range, he was not able to load up and get the power in his shots that he was able to in previous fights. So for the most part, when he threw his straight left hand, he was unable to get a full weight transition between both of his legs. And so the power on his shots decreased. Because if he had attempted to load up on the punches, as he had to some extent, I believe, heading into around the third round, he got hurt. So he had to revert to pot-shotting and going for speed and activity as opposed to power, because he was never going to be able to catch Usyk clean. And we saw subsequently to that fight, things started to get interesting with the conflict occurring in Ukraine with the Russian invasion and Usyk's thresholds being set aside because he had contemplated, obviously, defending for his country. Now, when it comes to that, there were rumors obviously going around that Usyk had slimmed down quite a bit, that he had apparently lost around the neighborhood of 15-20 pounds. I don't necessarily quite believe that. I do believe he lost weight, but I don't think that should necessarily be a huge factor in this rematch. Seeing us heading into this fight and looking at his training footage and his physique since he's touched down in the Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, he definitely looks a little bit bulked up. He's been rumored to be anywhere between the neighborhood of about 227 to 234. Now, personally, I felt before the first fight he would actually bulk up quite a bit and look to pressure Joshua and force Joshua to the back foot. This time, I think they're both going to engage each other mano a mano, and it looks like about now Usyk is going to be bulking up. He knows that in this fight, with the adjustments that Joshua is going to be looking to make, which is going to be to use a bit, with the implementation of Robert Garcia, he is going to look to implement the double jab. He's probably going to have an attack more focused on Usyk's body, and he's also going to look to get Usyk to the ropes as much as possible. So I think it's very possible, in the way I personally view this fight, is Usyk is going to have a change in tactics. He's not going to be looking to try to feint Joshua at mid-range as much. He's not going to engage him as much. I believe what Usyk is looking to do here, if Joshua comes in with the game plan, I believe he will, and his physique definitely looks wiry. He doesn't necessarily look as big as I thought he would come into the fight as. His core definitely looks a bit more lean. But my interpretation of Usyk's physique gain is I think he is going to look for power, and I don't think he's going to be quite as active on his feet. I think he's going to spend more of the fight on the ropes, and I think he's going to look to capitalize on Joshua overextending on his punches. So when Joshua double jabs and tries to step in with a straight right hand, as he sometimes tends to do when he has an opponent wounded, looking to attack someone against the ropes, he does tend to pick up his back foot. I do think it's going to be then when he's going to look to pivot. He's going to look to get Joshua in close proximity. He's going to pivot out, step back, get into sort of mid-range territory, and then he's going to start to look to unload his shots. Look for Usyk to throw the right hook a lot in the fight. But also look for Joshua to be very aggressive. I expect Joshua to not necessarily come out swinging for the fences in virtually a reckless abandonment type of a way, in the same sense that a Deontay Wilder would against like a Gerald Washington, but expect him to, at the point of exchange, be much more active. So when he's able to get Usyk head on in the pocket, which isn't going to be too often, but when he is able to, expect him to be much more active and expect him to be very trigger happy on letting his combinations fly. Expect him to be more proactive in this fight. He is someone who is coming into this fight with the mentality of a wounded animal, who is seeking his revenge, who is having to defend his pride and fighting for his career. because this fight is not only a fight for him to maintain his pride as a fighter and his perception amongst the boxing fans as a fearsome heavyweight champion, but also his financial potential, as him losing consecutive fights to a guy like Usyk, who was a significant underdog in the first fight, coupled with his loss to Andy Ruiz as a significant favorite, would do significant damage to his earning potential. Even though he's made a lot of money, he has not necessarily reached his end game as a fighter, which was originally supposed to be that fight with Tyson Fury for Undisputed. So he's going to be coming into this fight extremely hungry. Expect his proactivity to increase. With Robert Garcia, a weakness in many of his fighters, which I think could potentially work against him against Usyk, seeing as Derek Chisora is better than him at this, and it's not as simple as just being proactive. Robert Garcia's fighters lack the ability to cut the ring off and keep fighters near the perimeter of the ring. They can get fighters there. Ramirez is good at setting traps and luring opponents into exchange range to set up the double jab to get shots off on opponents when they're trapped in corners. But with Usyk, it's very hard to follow up, and considering the gap in foot speed, he's going to really struggle to cut the ring off. And I think that could be a very big issue for him in this fight. Usyk, like I said, I think is going to be a bit more willing to engage Joshua in this fight at exchange range, but he's going to use a lot more slick tactics in the pocket. And he's going to be very mobile. He's going to be looking to step around. He's going to be throwing punches with bad intentions, and I expect him to sit on his punches once he does those turns and gets Joshua off balance, because he knows that Joshua is coming to take his head off. And whenever Joshua gets him in the pocket, he's going to be looking to unleash. So he has to constantly offset that and keep Joshua off balance. And also, I think a lot of his game plan is going to be reliant on Joshua tiring out. But I'm also going to be curious to see how Usyk's body attack is going to play a factor in this fight, because the straight left to the body was a very effective weapon for him in the first fight. But Joshua coming into this fight pressuring him, lowering his center of gravity, could potentially make it a more difficult target. Now, him having a lower center of gravity also opens up the head, but it'll be interesting to see how he potentially attacks the body if he does. But I do expect this fight to be more crude than the first fight. I do expect both guys to definitely take a little bit more leather on a round-by-round basis than they did in the first fight. But for me, I definitely still make Usyk the favorite in this fight. And I think he'll always be the favorite over Joshua. Joshua's physical tools do make him a live underdog and do give him an opportunity to win. He's the bigger puncher of the two. He is the bigger man. He's the physically stronger man. But at the same time, that does get offset in large part by Usyk's physical advantages, as in his cardiovascular, his quick twitch muscle, and his foot speed. So once the fight gets into the late rounds, Usyk's physical advantages really start to take over, as Joshua will not have the physical advantages or the stamina to be able to keep himself on top of Usyk, to thus enforce his physical mass advantage over him. But early on in the fight, he will be dangerous, and I do think Usyk will probably get on his bike in the first couple or so rounds, until he starts to time Joshua's straight right hand, in which I think he's going to start to employ the looping left hook. I think he's going to look to counter Joshua's jab with the right hook. He's going to have issues with it because of Joshua's length, but I think he'll eventually figure him out. He'll start to pivot off to the left. He'll start to catch him with the check right hook. And I think the more and more he starts to hit him, and the more and more Joshua starts to miss, the more he's going to start to tire. And then eventually Usyk's going to get more comfortable. He's going to start standing off with Joshua, throwing combinations with him. Joshua will definitely land his fair share of shots. He will land the straight right hand, but I think in a war, I'm going to trust the guy with the better stamina, who's going to be able to last longer, who has the better chin, and whose power is definitely respectable, and the guy who's proven he can at least have Joshua out on his feet. Whereas Joshua was unable to hurt Usyk in the first fight. So my pick is that Usyk wins in a little bit more dominant fashion. I think he'll definitely have some difficult moments, because Joshua is going to employ more awkward, proactive tactics. So he's definitely not going to see the same fighter. But I do think there is going to be a trade-off, as in Joshua is going to definitely feel the risks, or showcase the risks of a more barbaric and more caution to the wind type of a style. And he is going to get himself into more trouble. And I think Usyk is the better fighter in the pocket. I think he's just a better fighter overall. And Joshua is going to really need to intimidate him early or just stop him. He does have an opportunity. I don't think people should write him off. He is dangerous. But I do favor Usyk to get the stoppage in this fight. I'm thinking around round 7 or 8. The undercard features Filip Hrgović versus Zhilei Zhang. And the other notable fight is Callum Smith versus Smith-Bauderlique. Hrgović Zhang, I make Hrgović the favorite to win. Smith-Bauderlique is interesting to me, as both guys, I believe, fought around the same time last year. Both in September, Bauderlique fought against Igor Mikhalkin. In that fight, that was basically seen as a 50-50. I think Bauderlique was the slight favorite, but he definitely turned in a very good performance. Mikhalkin gave him problems early, but Bauderlique was able to use his superior conditioning, his good speed, his good movement, and his good jab to be able to give him issues. Callum Smith is someone who's definitely shown, at least in the Lenin Castillo fight, he did show in that fight definitely a bit more ambition. And a little bit, he seemed to use his length a little bit more, as in his legs and his ability to keep himself out of an open, extended stance. So I don't think he'll have as much trouble in this fight as he did, say, with an Eric Skoglund, but I do expect Bauderlique to give him a certain amount of issues, because he is his main weapon is his jab, and Callum Smith does not move his head whatsoever. He is very, very, very susceptible to the jab. I do expect Callum Smith to get the stoppage around mid to late, but I expect I do expect Bauderlique to be able to land shots. Probably give him issues with his mobility until Callum Smith's power and his physical tools just eventually get to him. But yeah, those are my overall thoughts on the card. Let me know what you all think. Have a good one.